Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 19 of the podcast Perspectives in Rural Education. I'm your host, Ethan Homeyer. And today we are joined with Dr. Alexis Jones from EIU, which I'm very excited about. And I'll have her introduce herself and take it away from here.
Yeah, great. Well, Ethan, thank you very much for inviting me to be part of this. I've watched these vidcasts or podcasts, and they're really enjoyable. They really are very helpful for people considering EIU or a rural education. I am now in my 5th year as an assistant professor at Eastern. I came to Eastern after getting my doctorate at the University of Illinois. I actually live in Urbana, so not too far away from Eastern, and the commute is not bad at all. I do work with students who are looking at rural schools as a possibility, as well as I teach in the graduate program, and there are students from all over. So the graduate program in Teaching, Learning, and Foundations is purely online. And while that sort of provides challenges, I rarely see my students in person unless they're full-time graduate students, and I miss that sometimes. It also enables teachers from all over to attend Eastern and to learn from some of our professors, which is great. And so this semester, most of my students are from Illinois, but I actually have one student who is from Oregon. And so I'm not sure how she ended up coming to us from Oregon, but I'm grateful. She's terrific. So I really work with students, my graduate students, mostly being full-time teachers. So.
Wow, that's really awesome. So it's like they're getting their degree on top of already teaching, right?
They are. And that's honestly how most teachers end up getting their masters. I mean, just my own experience, I did it at the University of Illinois when I was teaching in Urbana School District. And yeah, you do it during your summers or you do it during your evenings. And so on top of a lot.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I bet that takes a little while. How long does it usually take for someone to get through the program?
That's a really good question. I'm not sure how to answer the how long does it take for the average student, because I think it really depends on whether they decide to take one course per semester or two courses per semester. Myself personally, I only took one course per term because I felt like teaching was already more than a full-time job, and adding a graduate course on top of that was an adventure. But some of my students right now are working through it pretty quickly and taking 2 courses per semester in addition to teaching and family. So they're time management champs. I'm not sure how they do it.
Wow,
Yeah.
I would definitely struggle, but
Yeah.
just shifting gears a little bit, if that's okay.
Sure. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, what was your journey like through education? Like, how did you get where you are now? I'm kind of curious.
Yeah, no, that's thank you for asking that. So so I am I'm an Urbana native, and still live here. And so Central Illinois is definitely home to me for a while. I got my undergrad degree at the University of Illinois. And then I taught in Danville for 4 years. And it was just the perfect place for me to start my teaching career. There were teachers that I met there who were unbelievable mentors to me. I learned a ton. And then I decided to come back to Champaign-Urbana for my master's degree, and I taught here in Urbana for 8 years. And a variety of grade levels, both in Danville and in Urbana, at then Prairie, now Dr. Williams Elementary School. I started teaching 3rd, moved to 4th, moved back to 2nd, moved up to 4th. I mean, I sort of hopped around until I had taught just every elementary grade.
Wow.
So that was an education in and of itself. Got my master's degree while I was there, and then after having my master's degree and teaching for a few years, I had an opportunity to be part of a wonderful federal grant program that Urbana had received, the Teaching American History Grant Program. was a really amazing opportunity for teachers to receive professional development on American history. I started out going as a participant and then ended up being one of the full-time grant staff. So I left the classroom at that time to work for them. And so working for the school district was really interesting. And I did that for about 6 years, doing some professional development for teachers and working on the new teacher mentoring program that Urbana had, quite a variety of things. And then I sort of came to sort of a crossroads where I was trying to figure out what I was ready for next and discovered that I really wanted to go back to school again. So got my doctorate at the U of I, and there I'm at Eastern. So it was lots of lots of switching around every so often, but I feel like it kind of helps give me maybe a bigger picture in terms of what education is like. So
Yeah, that makes sense. You kind of dip your toe in like a little bit of everything, right?
yeah, yeah. It does sort of help every once in a while when we talk about, for example, what supports will be available to our students when they first go out into their first years of teaching. It's nice to be able to say, well, you can ask your school district about a new teacher mentoring program, and these are the questions you should ask. So, so hopefully that little bit of everything has helped.
Yeah, I think it's a really unique experience.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you. What made you decide to want to just end up at Eastern?
Yeah. Well, I got to tell you that I'm still good friends with many teachers in the school district and the neighboring school districts around here. And I just have to say that every time I talk to somebody about getting, them getting student teachers or having practicum students, Eastern is always like right at the top. Like, oh, I just love getting Eastern students. Not that they don't like getting other students, but they make a point to say that they love getting students from Eastern because we just have such a strength in our field experiences, I think, and instruction that's really focused on some practical aspects of teaching, sort of integrated with the theory behind them. There's just a really nice base of like, okay, like how can we send you off into your first years of teaching with as much in your tool belt as possible? And so I was thrilled to get the interview, and I remember thinking at the time that I really need to bring my A game to this interview because this was really an opportunity for me. So yeah.
Well, hey, here you are.
Yes, and here I am. Yes, I'm very happy. This is definitely where I belong.
Well, I'm glad that it seems like you're enjoying being at Eastern. I think that's great.
I am. No, it's really nice to just sort of have regular conversations with other professors about students and student work and how to improve our classes. And I really like the atmosphere.
I liked it too. I've been here for 4 years as a student, of course, but I've been enjoying it. Everyone I've met at Eastern has that been so welcoming.
I have had the same experience. I really have. It's been really nice to just come to some place where like the support is just sort of out. It just this outpouring of support. It's really lovely.
It is. It's really nice. It's helps kind of settle the nerves a little bit.
It does, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Uh, I also wanted to ask, what sets rural education apart from education in more urban areas?
Oh wow, that's such a great question. So I wish I could think of one thing, but one there's a lot of things that actually sort of bring me back to the fact that we were just talking about the teacher mentoring. So one thing that we were sort of discovering when I was briefly working as a GA for the Illinois New Teacher Collaborative is that the challenges of new teachers in rural areas are somewhat similar, but also somewhat different than the challenges faced by teachers in an urban area. So, for example, when I was working with teachers, Urbana is considered small urban, but when I was working with teachers there, um, the it was very easy for me when we hired a special education teacher, for example, at the high school, let's say, to find another special education teacher at the high school who maybe their job assignments weren't exactly the same, but they were similar enough that the mentor could help the new teacher find which forms were necessary, how to schedule meetings, what the chain of command was in the district. In a rural area, when a teacher is hired, especially the more specialized that job assignment is, the bigger the challenge it is to find them somebody who can support them with their specific job requirements. So, for example, hiring a special education teacher or a PE teacher or a science teacher or something like that, the challenge is finding somebody who is that sort of job alike person nearby. That's more challenging because you might be the only fourth grade teacher in the building. So you might be the only science teacher at the high school. So finding that person who can provide that support is a challenge. It's not impossible. Sometimes it's just a matter of like doing the right kind of networking with places nearby. But that poses a different challenge for rural areas than for urban areas, for example. I think another really interesting aspect was during COVID. One of the things that we noticed in some of the rural areas was if there were areas that had sort of limited internet access, students would have trouble getting that kind of regular contact with their teachers. And so, whereas there are other schools that, Zoom classes were sort of a regular occurrence, there were some areas that just sort of had internet difficulties. And so students may not have had that direct face-to-face, but, on a computer screen
Screen to
contact with their
screen.
teachers for a while. So I actually, when we dropped for COVID for a little bit, some of my students who were located in rural areas, I didn't hear from them for quite a while because, if they had troubles with internet, then they wouldn't be able to turn in assignments, or they wouldn't be able to email me regularly or things like that. So they certainly couldn't get on a Zoom call because they just didn't have the bandwidth for it. With that said, I mean, those are two challenges, but with that said, there's also this degree of closeness and community that in larger areas, I'm not sure that you always find. And so I know that there are teachers who grew up in a rural area and they can't wait to go back because the whole community is there for them. And I just think that that's wonderful. It's great to hear students describe, just the fact that they'll have a school activity and everybody will come. And I love hearing that. I just think that that's a wonderful way. It's just such a nice model of thinking about schooling as sort of very community based. So,
I mean, yeah, that's very true. I mean, I also grew up in a rural town, and like
yeah,
I knew everyone in my school. And
yeah,
I
yeah.
came here and I met people who were like, "Yeah, my graduating class was like 2,000 people." I'm like, "Oh God." I mean,
is
like,
is that one of the reasons you decided on Eastern, or was it location or?
definitely one of the reasons was because it was small enough. The fact where I felt like I wasn't just a number, but it
Yeah,
wasn't like so small. Like it had like it was a nice medium for me. I feel like it's a nice
sure.
medium-sized school.
Yeah,
And I've definitely met a lot of people, and I've made a lot of connections
that's
since I've
great.
been here.
That's great. That's great. Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah, definitely rural education has some challenges, but I think it also has a lot of benefits. Like I said, and one of them
agreed.
definitely being the connectiveness that you make, so the community style of education. It's
Yeah.
very different, but I think it's very impactful for students personally.
Yeah, I think, when when I talk to students about, where they want to start their careers or where they feel like they want to end up, they're really things that you get and give up no matter where you go,
Hmm.
sort of like, choosing the size of university that you go to. There are obviously wonderful programs at a big institution, but you do miss that closeness and that sense of, well, I mean, almost family that you get at a smaller institution. And so I guess it just sort of ends up being sort of, what do you feel like you most value for this at this point in your life, when it comes to getting your first teaching job or getting your education or things like that. So,
Hmm.
yeah,
I will say, my thought is when it comes to rural education, I I think one of the disadvantages is that there's not as many opportunities as in, like, bigger urban areas. But I
sure.
I think that it kind of, in my experience, like when I was in high school specifically, like I if I wanted something to happen that wasn't available, I kind of had to push and kind of
Yeah.
initiate some change to happen. So I kind of
Yeah.
forced me to get out of my comfort zone a little bit, and I'm really appreciative of that, even though it was difficult at the time. But
Sure. Sure. It's funny that you say that. There are students in my RSO. So I about a year ago became the faculty sponsor for the Student Education Association group in the college. And there are students in the group now who are such go-getters. I am, when you say if there wasn't something there, you sort of initiated it or you had to make it happen. I see that in them too. And I just think that that's what an important quality to bring to like teaching and just life in general, this idea that, well, if it's not there, I'm just going to make
yeah,
it. And so they're just, they're driven to, well, we need to do a workshop on this and we need to think about this. And they're really ready to make it happen. So I
I mean,
admire that. I was not like that at that age. So I'm really impressed.
it was not easy, but I mean, it's
Yeah.
I think it's a great mindset to have, and just being able to, like I said, push through if there's something that you think needs to be done or you would like to be done.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. Yeah. I think it's great.
thank you. I'm having fun. This is a good time.
Good.
All right. Um, I want to ask you, since the pandemic happened, and like
Mhm.
how has the pandemic affected rural education and how it's worked, and like how, like you said, we've been able to communicate with each other, especially in rural areas where there's not a lot of um, great internet access. Like how has that affected education in general?
That's a great question. I'll answer as far as my experience goes, but I know that there are definitely probably other people who could, expand on this. So I do know that that since the pandemic hit, one thing that that districts, urban or rural, who have had holes in the internet. It's definitely not the technological way of saying that, but just problems
Yeah.
with connectivity. Um, then some of the things that they've had to do is they really have sort of reinvented what distance learning looks like. I mean, distance learning is tricky enough when we're on Zoom and we don't have that direct face-to-face kind of environment. But when you can't see the person that you're teaching or talk to them, um, then some school districts have sort of gone to this sort of like, I guess I call it the packet model, where kids get papers that are either sent home or they come pick up or that teachers have delivered. I mean, one of the things that I do know for sure is that there are articles all over the place about the kinds of things that teachers have done to go 10 extra miles since the pandemic started in order to reach their students. So if they're not seeing them in Zoom rooms, then they make regular phone calls. And if they're not getting a hold of them on phone calls, then they may drop by. I mean, my son, for example, was in 5th grade when in March of 2020. And so he finished up his elementary career on Zoom.
Mhm.
And even though our connectivity was just fine, and he was getting things done, some of the after school people would come and drop things off. Obviously, we were all masked, and and when he was in 6th grade and doing virtual learning, teachers would write postcards and letters and drop by with a gift bag if he had earned something. So that's one thing that I do know that is true across the board, is that teachers in general have just gone crazy, kind of trying to make sure that they are reaching their students in any way they can. And for some areas with problems with connectivity, sometimes that means if I can't talk to them and I can't see them and I can't be in a room with them, then one of the options here is sort of the packet method, which is I can give them worksheets to do. I can give them seat work to do. So at least they're practicing. And in March of 2020, it's weird to think about this now, but at the time, we all thought this was going to be very temporary. We all thought this was going to be very, very limited in time. I mean, I remember, when kids were sort of sent home, we were talking weeks at the time.
Yeah.
And so people didn't think necessarily like incredibly long term about how we were going to do this. My son's teachers sort of prepared sort of this menu of options for us to sort of keep going with things during his last quarter of the school year. And so some school districts, again, like I said, with the limited connectivity, they prepared worksheets for students to do if they weren't able to meet with them on Zoom. I think I'm never gonna say that like there was something good that came out of a pandemic that killed hundreds and thousands of people. But one thing that I do think that we have learned to do because of this is to network in different ways. So when it comes to Zoom, or Microsoft Teams or Google Meets or whatever platform people are using, I think that we've discovered that we can actually have fairly productive meetings that way. Even though it's not as much fun as being together, we can have those meetings, and that does sort of include people that are not in that immediate geographical area. So for example, thinking about professional development and sessions, conferences, whatever that we have at Eastern or wherever else, having a hybrid option has become a little bit more, standard operating procedure, because we know it will include people who might not be able to make the drive or just can't be in person that day. It seems like that Zoom option, that Google Meets or Microsoft Teams option is there more now because, well, partially I think we all have learned the technology better than we knew it in 2019 and before that. But I think we've sort of realized that like we can really get a lot more participation, a lot more inclusion if we open it up to not just the people in the room. So I think that's actually another thing that sort of has made things change. And that definitely affects people in rural areas, because if the connectivity is good, then if you're a new teacher and you're the only 4th grade teacher in your school and you have no other 4th grade teachers to talk to, you can now feel very comfortable talking to another 4th grade teacher 2 hours away, 5 hours away, because we hop on Zoom calls at the drop of a hat now. Like we're just networking virtually in ways that I don't think that we were before, which I think is actually going to end up helping some of the rural communities, especially when those new teachers are, maybe finding themselves sort of alone in their job.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, wow.
I
I,
just it's nice that we can find other ways to talk to one another now.
I mean, I agree. It's definitely expanded
Yeah.
our communication horizon. Um, and I understand what you mean when you say that you don't want to say anything good came out of the pandemic, but I think it's
Yeah.
also important to say there are silver linings. There are things that we can take from
Yep.
such a difficult time. And
Yeah. I maybe it's probably not inappropriate to say that there are lessons that we've learned from it.
yes,
Um, and maybe this is one of them.
I mean, I would agree. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Um, what would be your greatest piece of advice pertaining to education when it comes to students?
Um, so I thought about this a little bit, and one of the things that I think is my greatest piece of advice to my students now and then new teachers and rural teachers is, especially at this time, things are still very difficult. I mean, I think that it's not earth-shattering news to say that teachers have really had a rough deal the last few years. Um, and I think that my biggest piece of advice that's sort of timely would be to just try to keep moving forward in some way. Um, Whether it's, even when it's two steps forward and the next day is one step back, if there's that slow movement forward, whether it's, you know, new, like an instructional strategy that you've wanted to try, or some kind of self-care that you've wanted to investigate, or whether you really want to get involved in some kind of policy and you want to be sort of an advocate for teachers. Um, I think that we, over the last few years, we sort of got shocked and some of us froze. Um, and I think now we're just beginning to sort of see the light at the end of the tunnel. And I hope that that encourages teachers to just begin sort of taking some of those baby steps, whether it's toward um, their own self-care, or um, the way they engage students, or the way they act as advocates for the profession. So that sort of slow and steady forward progress is my biggest piece of advice. But I think also, along with that, um, I think that trying to make sure that you're having a little bit of fun every day is probably a close second piece of advice. And if you're not having fun, then make the fun yourself. That's
Yeah,
sort of like we were talking about earlier. Like if you're not having a good time, the students probably are not either. Um, so finding some way to have fun during the day, whether it's the book you're reading aloud to the students, or whether it's, jokes that you're making during a spelling test or whatever, try to have a little giggle every once in a while, even when things are hard like they are right
mm,
now.
yeah, it be a world of difference.
Yeah. Yeah. I really do. I mean, one of the things that I look for when I go out into classrooms and I observe my students in their practicum placements is whether they're having a good time. I mean, it's not marked like that on our evaluation sheet. It doesn't say, are they having a good time? But it's, do they enjoy the subject matter? Do they enjoy the students? And you can easily tell if they're enjoying themselves, even when things are difficult, if
Mhm.
they like what they're doing and they like their subject matter and they like their students. So
Yeah, I think that's great. And
yeah.
I guess to kind of sum up your biggest piece of advice into one word, I would, you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would say perseverance.
Yeah. I I I think that is a good way of saying that. I mean, I think um I mean, the last few years have been very, very rocky. And if there's, the fact that there are still so many teachers that are committed to their students is wonderful.
Yeah.
And, you know, I hope that they continue that way and continue to enjoy what they do. Actually, the teachers in my own research, when I've interviewed teachers about their needs and their emotional well-being and stuff during COVID, what they say all the time about the reason that they're still here is that they love their kids, they love their students. And that's just overwhelmingly the answer.
That's so heartwarming, actually.
It is. It is. It is. That's the reason that they, you know, deal with some of the hard days and the
Hmm.
frustrating requirements and things like that, is because they really just like those relationships with the kids.
I would think you would almost have to. I mean, like, teaching is
Yeah.
not an easy profession.
It absolutely. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. It's not easy, but one of the teachers that I interviewed, she said her roommate, she works with spreadsheets all day long. And she's like, when I come home from my classroom, even if it's been a rough day, I feel like I've really made a difference. And she said, I don't think I'd feel that way if I was working with spreadsheets all day long. No disrespect to people who work with spreadsheets all day long, but she really feels like she really accomplish something, and I love that about teaching.
Yeah, I think it's something you gotta be passionate about. I think that's awesome.
Yeah. Yep, definitely.
All right, so one last question for you.
Yeah.
This is really straightforward. What's your favorite student story or story in education? Just out of curiosity.
Oh gosh, I was thinking about this, and honestly, there's one that's really sad, and so I'm not going to share that one.
Okay.
um, but I think that my favorite student story actually came from a student my first year at Eastern. She, I wasn't a member of her thesis committee, but she was in my research methods class, and she was really struggling to put together some of her literature that she was putting into one of the chapters of her
Hmm.
thesis. And so we talked a lot, and I read several drafts of her stuff, and her comment has stuck with me forever as probably like the best compliment I think a teacher can ever get. Like,
Wow.
I mean, kids are adorable and they will hug you all day long, but I still think that this is probably, she mentioned that she felt like I could be critical of her work without squashing her soul. And I felt like that was probably the biggest accomplishment any teacher can ever make, is this idea of being able to challenge our students and push them to the next level without like stepping on, on who they are as people. And I've just never forgotten her saying that, because I thought like that's the pinnacle for me of teaching.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
gotta be a hard balance to maintain.
It's absolutely one of the hardest balances to maintain ever. I mean, this idea that we want to have high expectations for our students, but we also don't want to like make them cry regularly. I mean,
Well,
that's
yeah.
sort of not the point. We want them to be who they are, but just, be the best versions of themselves. And so it is a hard balance.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think in order for a student to be successful, they would at least want to be there some of the time, and so in order for that desire to be there, they wanna feel heard.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's sort of like that change can happen if you feel comfortable enough with who's helping you to change. I'm not sure if
Mhm.
I said that very well, um, but I mean, I feel like that's, if we can reach that kind of balance on most days as teachers, I feel like we're getting it. Like we're getting it if we can push them a little bit, but still they know that we care and they know that we're there for them and they can trust us, then
I think
that's good.
it's a good goal to have as an educator.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely one I keep in mind.
I like that, that's really nice.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. I haven't been in touch with her since I had her that year. And I still keep wanting to get in touch with her and just say, look, that really meant a lot to me, but I haven't talked to her for a while.
Maybe one day, maybe you'll see her
Yeah.
again.
Maybe one day.
Well, that's all the questions I have for you. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we wrap things up?
No, I don't think so. I think I'm really glad that you guys are doing this. I'm really glad, and I hope you keep getting the word out about um, the importance of looking into rural education options and the programs that Eastern has to support students who want a role placement. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you for being here. It's really appreciated. I had
Sure.
a really great conversation and a good time.
Yeah, me too. Thanks very much for this, Ethan.
No problem.